With great excitement, I introduce you to Northwood University, a truly exceptional institution in American higher education. Since 1959, this private, accredited university has been a vibrant bastion of free thought and enterprise, standing out among the thousands of other schools in the U.S. Known as America's Free Enterprise University, Northwood is dedicated to nurturing the next generation of leaders who drive global social and economic progress. At the heart of Northwood lies the Northwood idea, a philosophy that celebrates individual freedom, responsibility, and the importance of moral law and free enterprise. This entrepreneurial spirit is evident in that 1/3 of Northwood alumni own businesses. Northwood is more than an institution. It's a movement that empowers students to think critically and champion liberty. It is a rare gem in today's academic world. If you're passionate about supporting a university that values intellectual growth and free enterprise, or to learn more about its academic programs, visit northwood.edu.
Hi, everybody. This is Saad for the Saad Truth. Today, I've got with me journalist, columnist, and editor David Harsanyi. How are you doing, sir?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. I just want to read a few of your key biographical elements. 6 books published. The Nanny State was the earliest one in 2007. Obama's Four Horsemen. There's a big subtitle, but I'll avoid these. Then The People Have Spoken and They Are Wrong. That was in 2014. First Freedom, 2018. Euro Trash, 2021. And your book that's about to come out, I think, next Tuesday on November 19th, The Rise of Blue Anon, How the Democrats Became a Party of Conspiracy Theories. That's a great title because most people would undoubtedly predict, oh no, it's all coming from the right. So take it away, give us the synopsis, and then we'll drill down.
Well, that's exactly why I thought of it. Most people, there's a consensus in the media and among elites, I guess, that the right is much more susceptible to conspiracy theories, to misinformation and disinformation. But it's not true. I mean, I don't think anyone is immune from it. Don't get me wrong. I think it goes back to ancient Greece, probably even before. Conspiracy theories are often embraced by partisans, but the left's conspiracies are much more dangerous because they're usually laundered through media, polished up, calibrated for plausibility. In recent years, we have experts who are partisans participating in it, giving it credibility. And it's dangerous because those are very hard to debunk. We used to trust former heads of the CIA. If they said something was true, we would never think they would lie to us. The New York Times has been biased always. Since I'm a kid, I know that. But you never thought they would just make something up, basically, to affect politics. And it's the most successful, Russian collusion was the most successful conspiracy theory ever in politics and American life. It completely subsumed everything. Only thing we were talking about. It ensured that the Trump administration couldn't really govern correctly. So, but it goes, there are many other aspects to it, but that was the impetus basically for why. But I go back to the Michael Moores of the world, who were celebrated at the Oscars, who are bigger conspiracy theorists than anyone on the right, and so on. The election denialism of 2000, of 2004, as well. I don't like that word, but I'm just using their phrasing. But so
in some cases, when someone succumbs to a conspiracy theory, they truly believe it, right? So if you're a rabid Jew hater, I call it the 6 degrees of Jew. I can link any calamity to no more than 6 causal steps to somehow blame the Jew for it, right? An Amazonian frog just died in the Amazon. Go. Why is it the fault of the Jews? But in many of those cases, the person who is succumbing to the conspiracy theory truly believes it. Whereas in other cases, I think wink, wink, in the deep recesses of their mind, when they go to bed at night, they know that they're just peddling, nonsense. So in many cases, in many of the, Trump is is worse than Hitler and so on. in many cases, I almost can be assured that they don't truly believe that. So do you differentiate between I truly do believe the nonsense that I believe in versus I'm duplicitly, peddling that nonsense?
Well, I can't bore into the soul of people, but I'm pretty sure that most of the elites who came up with the Russia collusion thing, for instance, or who, talk about Trump being the next Hitler, or are cynically doing it. I think, and you would know more about this than I, but then I think there are credulous partisans who hear what they want and then they believe it. They silo themselves in a group of people who also believe it, keep reaffirming it as true, and then because of hatred or emotional reasons, maybe, or maybe people aren't that bright sometimes, frankly, they'll believe it and spread it. The guy who grabs a gun and tries to kill Donald Trump, or the guy who grabbed a gun and went down to Alexandria to kill all the Republican congressmen, he's, I think, convinced that he's been that there's a Nazi coming and that the world's going to end for him. But there's always cynical people, and then there's credulous people, and I think we have too many of the latter, but maybe no, we have too many of both actually. But yeah, I guess that's the answer.
Yeah. So there are several ways by which I could link your latest book to some of my own work. So, in say the parasitic mind, I talk about how all of these parasitic ideas were spawned on university campuses, and then eventually they proliferate to every nook and cranny of society. Now, in my case, I state up front that I will be focusing on parasitic ideas that come from universities, and then therefore, by definition, they all stem from leftist professors, because academia is completely taken over, by leftist professors, especially in the activist fields, right? So if you're in anthropology and in sociology and ethnic studies, the lopsidedness of Democrat to Republicans is absolutely astounding. And I make the point very clearly that it's not because only leftists peddle bullshit, but it's because in academia, that's the only animal that inhabits that ecosystem. And so I give usually one good example to point to this. The theory of evolution is much more likely to be rejected by people on the right, typically because it doesn't confirm with my religious beliefs. But evolutionary psychology, the application of the theory of evolution to the study of the human mind, is much more vociferously rejected by people on the left. And so in a sense, it speaks to the positioning of your book, which is, it's not that the right-wing guys don't spread conspiracies, but let's include the left guys as part of the tent of conspiracies.
Well, yeah, imagine if right-wing professors controlled all the schools. Then I assume there would be very fringe right-wingers who become professors after a while, and that they would spread their own conspiracy theories. But that's not the case. You can't go to an Ivy League school and probably find more than one right-wing professor, or not even a right-wing professor, or normie, someone who maybe tries to see both sides of a political issue. And that's why you create these. And frankly, you mentioned Jews and conspiracy theories have linked to Judaism for a very, into ancient times, are now again spreading on the left, because let's face it, even Marx was an anti-Semite and he came from a family of rabbis, right? It's always been part of the left. And then on the day after October 7th, you have pro-Hamas marchers in Harvard campus. So clearly something's gone terribly wrong there, not just because of conspiracy theories, which I think most of these people believe. Maybe they're just ignorant of history. I don't know, but I assume that they believe more than that. But also something has gone morally wrong, right? There's some moral problem with people who would defend rapists and murderers of civilians. So I think paranoia is part of it, because there's always paranoia about Jews, but I don't know. There's something more to it, I think,
I mean, in your case, you're very much focusing on the fact that political orientation, in this case, on the left, spews all this conspiracy stuff. But did you look at any other possible predictors? For example, irrespective of my political orientation, is there a particular personality profile that I may have that makes me more susceptible to being a conspiracy theorist adherent?
That's not my expertise. It's more of a history, but I would say that people typically who feel powerless in society are more susceptible to believing that dark forces are conspiring against them. And that's always been the case. But the left has kind of inverted that, in that even when they're in control, they pretend that they're victims. So I'll give you an example. I think one of the most pernicious paranoias of politics is the idea that there's a systemic racist society that is not letting Black people vote. It's easier to vote now than it's ever been for anyone in history in the United States. You can ask them to mail you a ballot in like 12 languages or more. It's easy. The idea that your agency has been stripped of you, that you will have no say in what happens to you in politics, it's very evil, right? I think, especially when it's not true. Or the idea that white policemen are creeping around trying to kill, hunting Black men. It's not true. Not saying there aren't racists. There are racists, and sometimes people do try to stop you from voting, but it's not a systemic thing in the United States. So you make victims out of people who aren't victims, and often who are running major cities, who are the major voting bloc of a city. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that when you feel powerless, that's when you are more susceptible to believing things like that.
Yeah, I think another parallel between your current book and some of the stuff that I've written about is, so when I talk about, creating a mind vaccine, right? I mean, is there something that I can offer you that could allow you to build an inoculation against some of these alluring parasitic ideas? And so then I ask myself, the same question could be asked within the context of your book, which is there any information that I can take and offer to an ardent conspiracy theorist that could anchor him away from holding that conspiracy dearly? And before I cede the floor to you, I'm going to be pessimistic and say that for a large chunk of people, they're impervious to any evidence that I might offer, because one of the most difficult things I have found to be true that you can't do is to change someone's opinion once it's anchored in a position. So what are your thoughts on that? Can I hit you with the mind vaccine, or once you believe in the conspiracy, you're down the rabbit hole?
And my personal experience is that there's nothing really you can say. A lot of it is emotionally driven. You want to believe these things because you feel like someone's taking something from you. But I'll give you a quick example. I think this is true. I don't have the exact numbers, but Jewish people, often in American Jewish groups particularly, always talk about Holocaust education. We need to educate people on the Holocaust. Then they would see how horrible it is, right? I mean, any normal person, rational person, moral person would be horrified. But there are studies that show that the more you teach it, the less people believe it, the more people become skeptical. Teaching people, just because you're rational about something doesn't mean that the other person is going to be rational just because you give them certain facts. It's like Ben Shapiro has that saying where facts don't care about your feelings, but your feelings don't care about facts. I mean, the truth is that a lot of people feel something and want to believe it, and there's no amount of information you can give them. These days, they'll just tell you, they'll dismiss it because they're skeptical that anyone is telling them the truth anymore, because we've lost trust in almost every institution, and it's the institution's fault that happened, but it's still bad for society that we can't trust the journalists, that we can't. If journalists tomorrow found something that Donald Trump actually did wrong, something terrible, and it was true, no one would believe it, right? Because they've lied so often. And so I think that's a problem as well for us.
To your point about the Holocaust example, where teaching more Holocaust, you're swayed in the opposite direction to what you were hoping. Leon Festinger, the pioneer, the founder of theory of cognitive dissonance, has a wonderful quote, which I quote in The Parasitic Mind, where I'm paraphrasing. I don't have the exact quote, but he says that the more evidence you provide, the more the recipient of that evidence comes up with all sorts of cognitive machinations to dissuade you that what you're saying is true. So exactly to your point, after I provide you with the inoculation, you're even less likely to believe in what I'm saying. So it's
that's a good point, because with conspiracy theories, it happens where the more you debunk things, the more questions it poses for people, or more, the more information you give them, the more holes they can, punch into your ideas. So, and most conspiracy theories are cobbled together from existing fact. There's always a sort of a seed of truth. For instance, the the Trump dossier, you remember that whole thing. People said, well, most of it is true. Yeah, most of it is true, but all the crazy parts aren't true. You always stuff some sort of plausible or realistic or factual things, and then that is the basis then for growing a conspiracy theory, which is often done. So
Now, journalists, I think I've cited some study, maybe it was 2013 from Indiana University, I'm going on memory, where it was something in the order of, 7% of journalists, I don't remember the exact number, identify as, conservative. So I suspect that it is as bad or as lopsided in journalism as it might be in academia, or maybe a bit better. How do you navigate that ecosystem? You're certainly not amongst your blue friends. So how do you, has it been a tough go, or are you holding the fort down?
Well, in the last years, I've worked at conservative, in places, but I did start my career working at newspapers like the Denver Post, when newspapers mattered and had many people reading them. And it was not an easy thing to do. I was on the editorial board at the Denver Post. And that was it wasn't like a crazy place, but journalists have changed. Even left-wing journalists that I knew, especially ones that have been around a while, they'd be happy to take down anyone. They were, of course, biased, but they were not activists. There's a difference between hiding Joe Biden's cognitive decline and and then when it comes forth, you just immediately just make a U-turn and get, and try to push him out of office, and just reporting things in a biased manner. When I was young, the New York Times, we always knew was anti-Israel. So you had to read between the lines to understand what was going on. Now, from their headline down, it's meant to mislead you. There's a difference between that, I think. So things have changed and the whole culture is wrong. If the New York Times publishes something that the editorial assistant doesn't like, they all have a little revolt and they get the boss fired. That's not how things are supposed to work in a properly functioning institution, and journalism is no longer a properly functioning institution.
Do you feel that, certainly given the cataclysmic changes that are taking place today in the United States, that there might be a very quick autocorrection within the journalism industry where, the fulcrum kind of goes back to the center? Or do you think the left train is going never to turn in any other direction?
I hate to always be a skeptic, but it seems difficult for me to imagine that happening, considering the culture I just talked about, but also the incentives. What is the incentive to be a good reporter? You don't get the followers you get if you're just anti-Trump and talking about how Trump is Hitler. The incentive is to be, the hyperbole is the incentive, not the rash-tempered, arguments in our society, in our journalistic society. And a lot of that has to do with social media as well and things like that. But, so to me, who knows? I don't know. If MSNBC goes out of business and CNN goes up, maybe people will see the light. But I suspect not. I suspect the New York Times will do excellent under Trump, because a lot of people are hysterics, and that's how they are, and that's what they want to hear. If there were, like, Elon Musk and other billionaires give a lot of money they plow money into politics, and that's fine. I think money is speech and all that, but I think they would do better to change our whole culture by plowing money into journalistic institutions that are, I wouldn't say conservative, but at least contrarian, skeptical of power across the board, not just of Democrats, but across the board. I think it's important not to participate in groupthink if you're a journalist. And I think you have to have a certain demeanor. I'm a contrarian. So on the same day, I'll argue with my brother about something on one side and then my father on the other side of the same argument. And in my heart, I'm passionate and believe the things I'm saying both times. Maybe I'm susceptible to conspiracy theories, but I feel like journalists aren't that way anymore, and they should be.
Yeah, to your point about the fact that it's beyond just giving money, the billionaires giving money, it's sort of a longer game. Immediately after Trump won, I was elated as a Canadian who believes in certain deontological universal principles, even though I didn't have a direct dog in that fight. I was very, very happy that he won. But yet right away, I started saying, look, guys, don't overestimate the impact of this, because it took 50 to 100 years for many of these dreadful ideas to fully proliferate, right? I mean, some ideas, cultural relativism started about 100 years ago, postmodernism about 50 years ago. Now, hopefully, it won't take another 50 to 100 years to eradicate them, but it is going to take a generation of, in the battle of ideas. Do you subscribe to that, or do you think that Trump's come in, nuclear bomb, and then, because I mean, I'll give you an example before I cede the floor to you. Occasional Cortex AOC just recently, I think maybe today, removed the pronouns in her bio. Now, that might seem like a very small thing, but it basically says that in her own calculus, putting that useless signal is no longer valuable. So a small win. So how do you view that? Is the road to victory still a long way away, or can we press the fast forward button?
I think it's a long way away. I don't even view this election as a win for Republicans or conservatives. For me, I believe at least that this was a normie election, meaning that that ad that said Kamala's for they, them, Donald Trump is for you, was so powerful because they, them is a microcosm of a bunch of social science quackery that have been adopted and spread by people who have gone through the university system and come out and been political activists and so on, totally detached from what a normal person was. I don't think the Latino male vote moved over because they believe, suddenly in free markets and, classical liberal ideas. I think that they believe that these people who say Latinx are crazy. You know what I mean? So Donald Trump really is very moderate on policy. He's a very centrist character, really, in many ways. And I think that people feel safe, even though they were calling him Hitler. They feel safe voting for someone like that. If you want to change the way people think, you bring them over and then you succeed in the things that you're talking about and you show them that this system here, that this value is important. And I think over a long time, they'll go that way. Think about, I'm more of a libertarian or classical liberal, I think, than most Republicans these days. But think about Barry Goldwater ran in 1964. He lost very badly. It took until 1980 to start convincing people that you had to change how the relationship between the state and the individual. It's a long time, and I think it's going to have to be a similar kind of change now. I still think there's going to be a fight on the right to define the party. I think the populists are winning now, and in many ways. But and also, I wonder, just to ask you, maybe you have is this movement Donald Trump, meaning he's a celebrity, he's a very singular figure and unique? Will it go past him? If J.D. Vance was running this election, would you have seen all that movement towards the Republicans? I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think there's definitely a unique element to Donald Trump that allowed this to happen, right? So, for example, I call it honey badgerism, right? His honey badger attitude. I mean, it would be difficult to imagine another human being being put through as many tests, stressors, and coming out on top of it the way that Donald Trump. So for no other reason, he would be sort of a historical role model in terms of his resilience and persistence and doggedness and so on. So I think from a policy perspective, I think there'll be continuity. Yet whether it be J.D. Vance or there's a whole bunch of people on the bench that are quite talented, whether it be Cotton or Haley or a whole bunch of other folks. But there is, I think, something truly unique that could only have happened because it is Donald Trump. And by the way, I've drawn I'm going a bit off your question, but I've drawn recently a parallel between. Do you know anything about soccer? I mean, do you know who Lionel Messi is? Does that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, vaguely, but yes.
Vaguely. Okay. So when I'm a huge Lionel Messi fan, and when the World Cup final was happening, I don't think I'd ever been as stressed in my life, which in a sense you could think it's a bit irrational. He doesn't know who I am, doesn't care about me. And yet I was fully vested in him winning. And I explained that I had appeared on Joe Rogan's show, and I said it was a moment where either cosmic justice was going to be meted or not. So for a player as beautiful as Messi to not have won the World Cup and also he's such a role model. He's a humble guy. He's a family man. He's been with the same girl his entire life. It just seemed like if he wins, then there's a chance for all of the rest of us to go through the difficulties of life. And then he won. And I say something similar to Donald Trump, not because he's as humble and as lovely as Lionel Messi, but the fact that you could throw everything at him and then he could come out victorious. We should be writing camp songs about this guy. So in that sense, I think that he is unique.
Yeah, I mean, the way he reacted after that first assassination attempt, it was just, it was amazing, and it was almost like if you didn't think that was a great moment, you weren't patriotic in some way. And it was just an amazing, iconic moment. People misuse iconic all the time, but that is an iconic moment. I do worry, if I can be honest, a little bit about the cult of personality around a person. I've seen the anti-Trump, never Trumper types. They abandoned all their principles because they hated Trump so much. But it's important for the other side not to abandon their principles just because they love the guy. And you do see that sometimes, and I do worry. I feel sometimes like no matter what he says or does, there's a groupthink now on the right where they immediately, follow. He is still just a man and just a politician. And politicians will always let you down because they overpromise all the time, and they can't really make your life fulfilling in the way that a sports team can, for instance. I think it's okay to be irrational about sports. I'm a huge hockey fan. You're from Canada. When for me, I am more nervous and more worried about my hockey team, the New York Rangers, than I am about anything in politics.
New York, great. Well, I can say that my favorite hockey player of all time was Wayne Gretzky. I think played for the New York Rangers for a bit.
2 years, yeah, 2 years.
2 years, but they didn't win during that time, did they?
No.
No. So when was the last time that I'm not trying to be funny. I really don't. When was the last time the New York Rangers won?
1994.
Oh, okay, not too far. So it's not a Boston Red Sox kind of situation of 80 years or whatever it was until they won.
It's not a great situation, but yeah, it's not a century-long situation.
What is the love with the New York Rangers? Are you originally from New York, or what's
yeah.
the love? Oh,
yeah, I grew up. My parents defected from Hungary in 1969. I grew up in Queens, New York, and then Long Island. Yeah.
But by the way, off topic, but I told you that it's an organic conversation. I recently went for the first time ever to Hungary, and then I went back to back. So I went 2 years in a row. Absolutely loved it. Magical. I share many of their values. Have you been to Hungary? How many times have you been? What are your thoughts about the ecosystem in Hungary today? Give us whatever you want to give us.
I've been there, and I was there, luckily or by happenstance, in 1989 when things, when communism fell. I was a young man, but still. Budapest, I think, is the most. Listen, I'm not a huge world traveler, but I think it's an incredibly underrated city. It's quite a beautiful city. I forget who said the bigger the parliament, the less important the country. And Hungary has a huge, beautiful parliament, Sure. And yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the government there, but I don't think there are any more. There are things I like about it. I do like that it's more that it sort of cares about the traditions of its own country, its nationality, and cares about Christianity, I guess you'd say, in a way. But it's no more authoritarian than France or Germany or anywhere else. That's my thing. It's just on the wrong side of the divide for people. For me, the EU is an intrusive, bureaucracy that is, that undermines people just no more than Orban does, or no less than Orban does. So to me, they fall well within the tradition of a European government, just maybe not in the way that EU bureaucrats like. But obviously, that kind of populism is getting more and more popular in Europe, it seems to me. So I don't know. What do you think of his governance?
Well, so there's many things that I really like. You referred to something that's not specific to this government, but about the culture and their pride and their heritage.
Yeah.
I actually had recently Balázs Orban, who's not related to Viktor Orban, but who's his political director.
Mm-hmm.
I had him on the show, and I made the point that there is something quite similar between, say, the Lebanese. And in my case, I'm Lebanese Jewish. So say Lebanese Jews or Jews in general, or say Armenians. My wife is Armenian, because you often have these folks who are a very small minority among a much larger majority. And then you kind of turn inward, not in the bad sense of the term, but in that you have to be very prideful about your accomplishments, because those are important things to retain. Otherwise, you're going to be swept by the larger majority. And so I feel that Hungary has that trait, as do the Lebanese, as do the Armenians. Amy Chua would often refer to some of these dynamics as market dominant minorities, right? Where, Jews hold a disproportional amount of power in all of these societies, even though they make up a minuscule amount. So that I like. I like the fact that there are statues of poets and scientists and mathematicians, and it's not of Celine Dion and Wayne Gretzky, right?
Right.
That there is a cultural element. I love the sense of, I'll call it orgiastic aesthetics, and in the good sense of the term, right? I mean, the manholes are worked beautifully in terms of the metal work, right? Like everything is exquisite and beautiful. In terms of the politics, look, there are elements that I really like. I think that having a nearly closed border, certainly given the current dynamics, is a civilizational no-brainer. My next book is about suicidal empathy, a large part of which is, hey, all immigrants are equal. Everybody come in. We're all equally likely to assimilate. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. I like that. I like the fact that they're anti-woke. So overall, I mean, so I don't know about some of the dynamics of how authoritarian Orban is, but on the big issues, I tend to support a lot of what they're doing.
I agree with all of that. I think it's important, especially in Europe. It's different in the United States and probably in Canada, where you have many ethnicities that need to live together. So you need sort of an umbrella kind of, still Western, but I think, just these ideals that we're supposed to share that money on the left don't. But in Europe, it's very different. And to let Hungary be overrun by immigrants, I don't care where they're coming. I mean, especially immigrants that aren't going to assimilate into Western culture, but just even overall, such a small country, it would be a bad idea for them. They would lose their identity in that kind of wave. Even big countries like France are suffer. So imagine what would happen to Hungary. So I think they have every right to close a border. And I have no problem with that part of it. It's just some of his, I think that the lack of open discourse there and speech and journalism, I'm worried about that a little bit. But again, in Germany, the police can show up at your door and arrest you for a mean tweet or something, So for me, that is that's just as exactly. That's just as authoritarian. Having a gang of Islamic immigrants running around looking for Jews, to me, and you doing nothing about it. To me, that's just as bad as anything Orban allows or doesn't allow in his country, if that makes sense.
It does. Do you feel personally less safe as a Jewish person in the United States right now? Are you seeing it? Do you have a child who's going to Columbia or Harvard, or any personal stories of some of the stuff that we've been saying?
Well, I'm not going to say where my kids go, but if it's for science degrees. If it was for anything else, I think being an autodidact is a better option these days. In many ways, and you'll probably get a better education. I don't feel less. I mean, there's more anti-Semitism now than I've ever experienced. I get it every day. For this, like you were saying before, for ridiculous things I don't even understand why I'm being called Jewish. And I don't want to sound dramatic, but I mean, we have a Second Amendment, and I participate and embrace that amendment. And I think that Jews are, I always believe that Jews should be, own firearms. I mean, I'm not saying someone's going to bother me or anyone's bothered me, but I think it makes me feel much safer. It does bother me that the left is just overrun by anti-Zionists who are just, which is just a euphemism most of the time for anti-Semitic activity, normalized in the Democratic Party. I mean, you have elected officials in Congress who are complete and open anti-Semites, and the Jews in Congress who are Democrats won't even say a word. They won't say a word. And that is a betrayal of their people, I think, in a way. And it's a betrayal of American values as well.
So that speaks to the earlier point that we were making when I said, look, I can hit you with all the evidence you want and you're still going to go la, la, la. That is perfectly the case with most parasitized American Jews, where notwithstanding the fact that a lot of them should have revisited their voting behaviors. I mean, a few did. There's been a bit of a shift,
Yeah,
but
there's been
not
a shift.
nearly as much as you would have thought. Do you have any unique insights why it is difficult for most Jews to switch sides?
I don't know if this is unique. I doubt it, but I mean I think that the the whole accusation that Jews are Democrats, you know, and just closed-minded has been overdone in a sense. They're in urban areas where almost every minority votes for Democrats. It's not that they're not actually unique in that way, but you know, I also think that a lot of American Jewish organizations aren't really Jewish in any real way. I mean, you know, they create denominate. I'm not a religious person. I'm a secular person, but I value faith, I value religion, and I value Judaism as both an ethnicity and as in a religious way. And I don't think they do. They invent what is it called? I forgot what word. What was the concept where you have to heal the world? You know,
Oh, tikkun
Tikkun
olam.
Olam, yeah, which is a real thing, but they've taken that little thing out of context, created a whole religion around it, which is more about rainbow flags than it is anything that's actually a Jewish value.
Right.
They constantly call things Jewish values that have nothing to do with Judaism. Abortion is more important to some of these groups than Israel is, or any kind of value that helps Jews, or I mean value that helps Jews, and so I think that's a big problem. In many ways, evangelical Christians and Christian groups are better for Jews than Jewish groups in this country. I'm happy that Mike Huckabee is the ambassador to Israel because he understands that situation better than almost any leader here or Jewish leader here. And I'm not saying everyone, but these, the ADL and these major organizations, I think they've lost their way, if they ever even had the right way. I'm not sure about that. So
yeah, no, that makes sense. Since you mentioned Huckabee as one of the appointees, of the current appointees, are there any that you're incredibly excited about? Boy, he got that spot on. And any other ones that you say, what the hell was he thinking? Can we do a do-over on that one?
Well, I am happy about Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. I don't love him in the Senate because I am, I would say, a zealous capitalist, I guess, or a free marketer, and he is not that. But his view of China, I think, is correct. His support of Israel, I really admire because he never backs away. I'm happy with Mike Huckabee as well. I think that's great. I'm less, I don't love, the Tulsi Gabbard thing. It's not. I think she's a patriot, and I think she'll do the right thing. But I think she's susceptible to some of the paleo ideas about American power that I don't love. I'm not saying I'm not no neocon or anything, but sometimes you have to teach someone a lesson, and I'm nervous that we're not going to do that sometimes. Matt Gaetz, as AG, I think is a mistake. I just, I think Trump wants a person there who's going to break things and all that. But, it's a big if you really want to break things, if you really want to change culture, you're going to get someone who's super competent and can do it, not in a way that's going to, that's just for show, but in a real systemic way, change the culture of the, of the Justice Department. I don't think he is the guy for it at all.
You feel that he doesn't have the legal and administrative gravitas to be able to pull that off?
I don't think he has the gravitas. I can't. For me to say he's not qualified is tough because these people are Democrats constantly put people in positions who aren't qualified. It's now the norm to put people who aren't qualified in positions. I just think he's not the right guy to meticulously undo the damage that the Justice Department has done because, he's just a firebrand. And I get the impulse to do that, to get revenge and all of that. But in the end, I'd rather have a country that's run better. I don't think we value competency enough. DeSantis turned just a guy who I think is super competent as an executive, took a state that was always a swing state. He barely won in 2018, and he turned it now into a solid blue state, red state. And I think mostly he did that because he's super competent at running the government. I think we need people who actually can run the government, who aren't ideologues always. So anyway, I don't know if, I don't think he's going to get through anyway, but who knows? We'll see.
What are some things that you do beyond writing? What are some things that you enjoy doing? Do you read a lot? Do you have any advice for aspiring authors? I always like to bring in a personal element so that people get to know the authors, not
Sure.
just thought. Yeah. So tell us about some of that.
What do I do? I mean, now that my kids are off
Other
in their
than
own
cry at New York Ranger games. Other than
well, I have not missed a game, maybe one or two games in the last 30 years, I would say. So I'm a huge hockey fan. I started out as a sports writer, actually. I covered
oh, right.
baseball and stuff like that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, obviously I love to read a lot but I like to play guitar. I like to go fishing, and enjoy myself in that way. I don't know how to give. Here's my advice to writers who want to be in journalism that I always give is that don't go to journalism school. That's the first thing you need not to do, right? Journalism should be maybe a 2-year degree. And I think that it's much more important to try to find internships but it's difficult because, journalism professors have PhDs in journalism, which I don't even know. I can't think of a bigger waste of time. But I'm not sure. It's probably difficult to get hired if you don't have that degree in these big outlets, I suppose. But just get out in the world and have a liberal arts education that's real, a classical education. Try to understand. There are a lot of people on beats today that don't like let's say business beat or economics who don't really seem to have any kind of grounding in economics at all, or the funniest thing, religion, people who write about religion, sometimes you're reading it, you're like, this person has never read a book about Christianity. They don't understand anything about what this is. So I think that's important. And the thing that I think is most important that we don't do anymore as writers and stuff is debate.
Yeah.
Like, it's part of my book, actually. It's that no one debates you. They just call you a Russia dupe, or they say you're a traitor. They won't actually debate you on the issues. It's easier to play the man. And I think that what happened is they stopped debating, and maybe they don't even know how to do it anymore. I mean, when I saw J.D. Vance, who I don't love him that much. I mean, again, with the economics, but he was so impressive in taking apart the media, because I don't think they sometimes even knew what he was talking about. Like, they're not prepared to have these intellectual or policy debates. So I think that you should always know and you always know what your political opposition is thinking and what their case is, and also present it fairly in your own pieces. You can rip them apart, but you should present their arguments in a fair way, not beat down straw mans all the time. I don't know.
Do you have any specific processes that you use when you're writing? I mean, you've written 6 books, which is a very different process than writing, an 800-word article, because that's a long journey. You've got to have. So, for example, when I'm trying to help my students, if they're doing an MSc thesis or a doctoral dissertation, I tell them, at least have a roadmap of where you'd like to go, so that when the reader is reading, I have a sense of where I am in the unfolding story. So do you have any such processes? Is it more bottom down, top down, or bottom up? It's a bit of both.
It always depends. I would say this for aspiring, opinion writers, and I wish that we just let young people be opinion writers right away, and they're never actually reporters. I think it's important for you to try to be a reporter first, but whatever. If you can get a columnist job, good for you. But you should read the greats. You should read people you love. I'm not saying you should copy them, but you should be inspired by them. I grew up reading P.J. O'Rourke, who I loved, Sometimes when I feel like my writing's not coming out that smoothly, I go back and I'll read some of his columns to give me inspiration. I think that's important. But yeah, sometimes I think there is a trick. If you're writing just 800-word columns, a book is a different animal. You write the headline. If you can't explain what you're saying in the headline, in a simple headline, then either it's too complicated, what you're saying, there are too many arguments, or you haven't thought it through entirely, or, so that's what I do. And then I try to come up with, 3-4 points I'm going to make. And then I revise. I mean, there are people I've heard, like Buckley or Christopher Hitchens, who used to write and it would come out perfectly the first time, and they just send it in after half an hour. I'm not that way. I like to sit on it. I like to think it over. I try to be somewhat, if people might disagree, but I try to be funny. I think synthesizing complex things and trying to explain it to normal people in a way that they can understand it and enjoy reading it is very important. Academic writing is different, but if you're writing for newspapers, if you're writing for, general audience, I think you have to be entertaining too, not just Yeah, not just tell people what to think, make
Well,
the arguments.
and to your point, I mean, I don't know how much you know of my work. I mean, in my public engagement, I use humor and satire. So I'm not just professorial, I mean, of course I can be that, and I am that, but depending on the context, I always tell people that I will use all of the tools within my persuasion toolbox in order to try to hopefully convince you. And humor is an incredibly powerful way. If I want to demonstrate the lunacy of the left, what better way than to exaggerate it using hyperbolic satire? And I do all sorts of skits. Now, it's funny because a lot of my colleagues, a few of whom are mild friends, because I don't have too many academic friends because I can't stomach them, they'll say, "Hey, but God, but don't you think it affects in a negative way your professorial facade by no, I'm a multifactorial being. I'm a multifaceted being. I can be professorial when I speak at Stanford, and I can act like a buffoon when need be." And so I'm delighted to hear that you liked O'Rourke, who I think used humor. You use humor. I think it's an incredibly powerful tool.
You do something else. I've been reading your book is that you personalize it in a way. You tell your story. I think listen, I don't love to divulge everything about my life because they're crazy people out there, obviously. But I think when you tell them about yourself and how you came to where you are, not just professionally, but ideologically, and how your thoughts evolved, and sometimes how you were wrong or how you changed your mind.
Absolutely.
I think it connects them to you in a way, and that they will become fans of you or understand what you're saying more. Now, I have a readership. It's not huge or whatever, but I have people who have been with me for a very long time. And I think it's because I can be open about being wrong or learning something new that changes my mind about something. And I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. And just reading about your past in Lebanon and everything in your book, I think that probably brings people in as well. I think telling a personal story like that is important. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, because when people approach me, say they recognize me on the street, they approach me with such an intimacy that sometimes I'm taken aback. I mean, then in retrospect, I say, wow, that was such a lovely thing. It could be anything. It could be, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that your dog passed away. I'm like, how the hell does this person know this? And then I say, oh, because I tweeted it 4 days ago and I've got a lot of followers. And so I do think you're exactly right that people feel that they are intimately in your life by sharing those important details from your personal life. I agree with you. All right. Yeah. Go ahead. Good.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, it is weird when someone approaches you and remembers something you wrote like 5 years ago that you don't remember, or they talk to you like they know you and they don't. And I'm pretty socially awkward, I would say, but it is also a nice thing because you realize people are listening to you, and that's what we want. Yeah.
Beautiful. I know right now you're in the midst of trying to promote this book, which I want to mention again, comes out next Tuesday, The Rise of Blue Anon, How the Democrats Became a Party of Conspiracy Theorists. So yes, we're focusing on promoting that. Is there anything else coming down the pipeline that you might want to use this platform to promote? Take it away, David.
Well, just my column. I write columns at the Washington Examiner these days, and also I have a podcast with Molly Hemingway every week called "You're Wrong,"
right.
where we agree often, but we also disagree often. She's more, I would say, on the populist side of things, and I'm more on the classical liberal side, I guess. I don't know how to explain where I am, but so yeah, and that's once a week, comes out on Wednesdays.
That's under the umbrella of the Federalist?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, wonderful. David, stay on the line so we could say goodbye offline. Thank you so much for coming. Guys, go out next Tuesday and get that book or pre-order it right away. Best of luck with the book, David, and thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Cheers.